Welcome to the West Virginia Media Lab podcast. Today, we're going to venture into, well, a really captivating part of West Virginia's identity. Its unusual creatures.
Oh, yeah. The big names, right.
Exactly. You've got the Mothman, that winged enigma everyone knows.
And sheep squatch lurking in the woods.
Right. And don't forget the Flatwoods Monster. So strange.
They're definitely otherworldly.
And the thing is, these aren't just, old, scary stories told around a campfire. They're woven deep into the state's fabric.
Absolutely. You see them everywhere.
You really do. Festivals dedicated to them, museums popping up.
Even in video games like Fallout 76. They're part of the landscape, virtual and real.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about where folklore ends and, well, maybe something else begins.
It does. And what's really interesting for you listening is how these figures become more than just monsters. They're like a shared language for the community.
A language reflecting history, maybe fears, the unknown.
Yeah, exactly. They say something about the character of West Virginia.
For sure. So while these legends are huge and their cultural footprint is undeniable, we wanted to explore what's been happening more recently.
Right. Amidst all the history and the festivals, what's the current situation? Are people still reporting things?
That was our goal, yeah, to sort of sift through what information is out there and get a sense of the recent activity, or maybe the lack of it.
That's a good way to look at it, because the stories themselves, they have momentum passed down and all that.
But for you, trying to understand what's happening now, the question really is, what does the recent evidence, or maybe the silence, tell us?
Okay, so let's maybe step back for a second, put this in context. West Virginia's history with this stuff goes way, way back.
It really does. It's not just the famous ones from the 20th century. We found mentions of the Ogua near Holt, I think.
Yeah, Holt. And get this dating back to 1745.
1745. That's like pre-Revolutionary War weirdness.
It really sets a precedent, doesn't it? Establishes this long tradition of, well, unusual encounters long before Mothman.
And speaking of Mothman, obviously, the 1960s sightings around Point Pleasant are iconic.
Absolutely central. And forever tied, tragically, to the Silver Bridge collapse in '67.
It's like these mysteries get tangled up with real historical events. It adds another layer.
It does. And for you, that connection between the sightings and the disaster, it raises questions, right, about how we interpret things, how we look for meaning when something awful and unexplained happens.
Definitely. And then there's the Flatwoods Monster back in '52. That one's just bizarre, the description, the glowing eyes.
Truly strange. And sheep squatch, a bit more recent in the lore, right?
Yeah.
Described as this big, woolly, two-legged thing.
Yeah, and the point is, these aren't forgotten tales. People are actively celebrating them now.
The festivals are a huge part of that.
Oh, yeah. The Mothman Festival, the West Virginia Bigfoot Festival, they draw big crowds, lots of enthusiasts.
And there's even the West Virginia Bigfoot Museum down in Sutton.
Right. We saw that. They've got casts, stories. It's like a dedicated space for preserving these accounts.
Which, for you thinking about this, it shows how these legends shift from just stories to being part of the local identity. Even tourism.
The museums, the festivals, they kind of keep the flame alive, even if the original sightings were decades ago.
Exactly. They reinforce the cultural weight of it all.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. Lots of history, lots of ongoing cultural buzz. But what about recent sightings? What's been reported lately?
That's the key question, isn't it?
Well, the most recent specific detailed account we could actually find in the information we looked at was from 2020.
Okay, 2020, what was it?
It was the Ogua again, reported in Fairmont on the West Fork River.
The Ogua. Interesting. So what did they see?
2 fishermen reported seeing this huge creature. They estimated it was maybe 20 feet long.
20 feet? Wow.
And about 500 pounds, they thought, with a very distinct turtle-like look.
That turtle description keeps popping up with Ogua reports across time, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That consistency is kind of striking.
It is. And that 2020 report gives a fairly clear picture, making it, a pretty significant recent data point.
Yeah, it stands out as a specific instance.
It really does. Now, we did come across more general talk about Bigfoot.
Bigfoot. Always a popular one. Where were these claims centered?
Mainly in the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve area, which I guess makes sense. It's vast, pretty wild.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
For you, the gorge seems like a plausible habitat, right?
Yeah.
Big, remote areas where something large and elusive could potentially hide.
Yeah, you could imagine it there.
But, and this is important, what was the detail like in those claims?
That's the thing. That's where it gets hazy. While the idea of Bigfoot is clearly still around in West Virginia, We just couldn't find recent accounts tied to specific dates or times or, detailed descriptions in the info we looked at.
So more like general rumors or feelings rather than specific sightings?
Pretty much, yeah. Just people say they see things there kind of stuff.
Okay.
And what's also quite noticeable is the lack of recent credible reports for some of the other big names.
Like, Mothman.
Yeah, like Mothman. It seems like the buzz around actual sightings has really quieted down for some of them.
That quiet is interesting, isn't it, for you to consider?
Yeah.
Mothman, despite being huge culturally, hasn't had a well-documented, credible sighting reported since, 2007? At least based on the information we reviewed.
Right. And it seems like a lot of the older accounts are now being looked at differently.
Re-examined, yeah. With more, let's say, conventional explanations gaining ground, like misidentified birds, sandhill cranes, maybe big owls.
Exactly. And it feels like a similar story for sheep squatch and the Flatwoods monster.
Still culturally present, but no recent encounters.
Yeah. They're definitely still part of the conversation. You see them on T-shirts and art. But actual substantiated sightings, detailed accounts from recent years, they seem to be missing from the public record we could access.
And for you, that gap is really interesting. You have this strong cultural life, but a lack of new evidence. It makes you ask how these legends keep going so strong without fresh encounters.
It suggests the power of the story itself, maybe.
Could be. The narrative becomes self-sustaining, almost separate from needing new proof points.
So that led us to think about social media. Platforms like X, if things were happening, surely they'd pop up there, right?
You'd think so. Real-time reports often surface there. What did you find?
Well, we saw a post from the @WV Bigfoot Museum account from April this year.
Okay. Promoting the festival.
Yeah, exactly. Promoting the upcoming West Virginia Bigfoot Festival. Lots of excitement about vendors, speakers, that kind of thing.
Huh.
But notably, nothing about any new Bigfoot sightings. No breaking news from the field, so to speak.
So even within the enthusiast community online, the focus seems to be more on the history and the event itself, not necessarily on current activity.
It seems that way. It's more about celebrating the lore.
Right.
We even did a specific search on X. We looked for cryptid West Virginia sightings since 2025-0401.
Oh.
Nothing. Zero relevant results.
Yeah.
No fresh reports bubbling up publicly there in the last month or so. And we checked our own feed, too, at WV Media Lab for the past 30 days. Nothing relevant there either.
So for you listening, that absence on social media, while it's not absolute proof nothing's happening anywhere, it does suggest there isn't a wave of widely shared or public encounters recently.
Yeah, you'd expect at least some chatter if things were really active.
Social media usually picks up on that kind of stuff pretty quickly.
Which brings up a really important point, I think. The challenge of relying only on online stuff or mainstream news.
Definitely limitations there.
Right. This lack of recent verified sightings in those public spaces, it could mean a few things for you to consider.
Like maybe the sightings are just too anecdotal, not enough detail to make news.
Could be. Or maybe recent encounters are happening, but they're being shared differently.
That's
like in smaller, more local forums, private groups online, places that aren't easily searchable.
That's a very real possibility. Local communities, especially in rural areas, often have their own ways of sharing news. Word of mouth, maybe closed Facebook groups. Stuff that wouldn't show up in a broad search.
Exactly. So you can't just rely on a quick Google search or checking X and assume that's the whole picture.
No, it highlights the limits of that approach.
Yeah.
There might be stories circulating under the radar, so to speak.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. What we've seen is this really strong, undeniable cultural life for West Virginia's cryptids.
Absolutely. The festivals, the museums, the media presence, it's all very vibrant.
But then when you look specifically for recent, well-documented sightings,
It's quiet.
yeah, there seems to be a real scarcity. That 2020 Ogua report in Fairmont really stands out because it is specific and relatively recent based on what we found.
So for you, the picture's kind of dual-sided, isn't it? The legends are thriving culturally, people are interested, but the concrete, publicly verifiable evidence of new encounters seems pretty thin on the ground lately.
With that Ogua sighting being the main exception we could pin down.
Right.
So I guess the main takeaway for you is this. West Virginia's cryptid lore is definitely alive and kicking, but actual verified sightings reported recently, they seem infrequent.
That Ogua one from 2020 is the last specific instance we identified in our sweep.
Exactly. The stories keep getting told, they spark the imagination, they're part of the state's unique flavor.
But those first-hand accounts of new encounters seem to have faded a bit from the current public narrative, at least based on accessible information.
Which leaves you, the listener, with something to think about, right?
Definitely a final thought to mull over.
Why is this the case? Is it just a quiet period? Are creatures like this just naturally elusive?
Or has how we report or even perceive these things changed in the modern age? More cameras everywhere, but maybe less willingness to report the unusual.
Or maybe, like we said, the real stories are being told locally, just not reaching the wider web. Perhaps digging into those local communities holds more clues.
It's definitely food for thought. The mystery endures, even if the recent reports are few and far between.
Absolutely. Well, that's been our look into the current state of West Virginia's cryptid scene. Thanks for joining us here on the West Virginia Media Lab podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. The West Virginia Media Lab is all about celebrating our state and its people, businesses, stories, news, and folklore. If you love West Virginia like we do, be sure to comment below, then subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell to stay connected. Until next time, stay wild, wonderful, West Virginia.